Hi everyone, this question is similar to the previous ones, except it's a little bit more complicated to come up with the hypothesis test because they don't give it to you. And there's quite a bit of numbers here that they're providing. So I wanted to kind of point out and try to help you discern which information you need. So the claim is, if you read through all of this, on a certain day, 9 out of 30 stocks increased. And so what they're trying to see is, using that as a claim, they're trying to see if the other market, so the stock market is kind of broken up into three separate divisions. One of them is called the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and that takes 30 stocks that have provided like the most money or have the biggest income, and those 30 stable stocks are on the Dow Jones. Next, and by the way, you can get removed off the Dow Jones. General Electric last year had been replaced, or a couple years ago had been replaced because their financial withstandings or withholdings actually didn't do so well. So at any rate, you do have the Dow Jones, but then you also have the New York Stock Exchange. That only has 77, but then you can have the NASDAQ and the S&P, and these are all other stocks that all kind of combine together, but there's certain subgroups. Well, at any rate, based on the Dow Jones is what you see on the news every day if you watch it, about how much that went up or down. In this case, here is what we're doing. Analyst claims we can assume 30% of the stocks traded on the New York Stock Exchange went up that day based on what happened with the Dow Jones. And usually they do correlate, but they're trying to see if that's actually true. So they took a sample of 77 stocks traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and 18 of them went up. So we're trying to see how this works. So let's see if I can write how we would write the claim for this. So let's see, we need one more sentence though. You are conducting a study to see if the proportion of stocks that went up is significantly less than. So this keyword, less than the 30% or the 0.3. That's going to be important right there, the less than. So if I were to write my hypothesis, I would write it as follows. I would say, the null hypothesis is that since 30% of the stocks went up on the stock exchange, 30% would go up on the New York Stock Exchange. 30% went up on the Dow Jones, then 30% would go up on the other one. So we took a sample of stocks on the New York Stock Exchange and found out that less than 30% went up. But is that number significantly different? So here's what I would write. I would have 30% is my claim. My alternative hypothesis, so this is with the new data, my sample of stocks that I pulled off the stock exchange, P would be less than 0.30. All right, and then the rest of the information provided in the question is pretty straightforward. It's similar to the other ones, but getting to this point is what makes this one a bit more challenging. All right, there's my significance level, 0.02. All right, so let's type this all in and get some information. All right, I still have data in here from my previous question, so let me just get that out of there. All right, so here we go. So the significance level is 2%, so let's put a 2% in there. Make sure the percent sign's there. The number of successes. So here is 18 out of my sample size of 77. So I have 18 out of 77. And you can see that only 23% of the stocks went up that day in the New York Stock Exchange. So they're trying to figure out, did the New York Stock Exchange actually act differently than the Dow Jones? Is it statistically significantly different? So we have our null hypothesis, P is 30% or 0.30. So I would write it as follows, 0.30. And the alternative, if you recall, let me pull it back up here so you can see it, had a less than sign. So that would be, and remember they said less than here, that would mean it's left-tailed. Go back here. Alternative, we would do this drop-down left-tailed. All right, we have all the information we need. So let's go ahead and fill out our form. So the first one's asking for the test statistic. Again, here we go with the test statistic. It's minus 1.27. That's the number of standard deviations away this sample would be from 30%. So I'm only 1.2 standard deviations below. So what is the probability that that could be due to that I could achieve that sample or more extreme, given that 30% was the center. And the probability, or the p-value, is 0.102, so just about 10% of the samples. So 0.102. So how does that number compare to alpha? Remember, alpha is 2%. This is 10.2%. So I'm quite a bit greater than alpha. If I'm greater than alpha, I haven't quite reached a low enough threshold to reject the 30% idea. So I would fail to reject the null. And let me scroll down here a little bit. So let's see how I would do the conclusion. I do not have sufficient evidence. So this one right here. There is not sufficient sample evidence to support the claim that the proportion of stocks that went up is less than 30%. So even though my proportion was lower than 30%, it wasn't statistically significant. It wasn't unusual enough to say that there was a big difference between the two stock exchanges that day. So there is not, because I failed to reject the null, I can still say in general there was that 30% of the stocks went up that day. All right, I hope that helped. I know it's confusing because of the context with the stock market, but sometimes you learn more than you need to in a stats course. But if you focus on these numbers, you should be all set. So in your problem, just make sure you look at how these numbers are generated so that you use all the right ones. All right, good luck.